I'm talking about the innocent people who were killed, and I'm talking about the innocent people who were held hostage. I'm not talking about soldiers. And I'm interested, actually, because you can't defend it. You're not even trying to defend it.
Okay, again, I said it. No one, there's no right or no rationale to capture any innocent civilians from both parties. But again, we have offered a hand for peace and settlement of this conversation for 30 years. What is the response? More killing of our people, more annexation of our land, more humiliation of our holy places, and we have no choice than to fight back.
Now, there are 59 people who were taken hostage by Hamas who are still being held in Gaza, although how many are alive is not clear. The hope is that they might be released, or their bodies might be released as part of an extension of a truce which ended on March the 1st. But that does seem a long way off, with the US saying that Hamas is making entirely impractical demands at meetings in Qatar. And without a truce, the situation is grim. UNICEF say that 1 million children are struggling to survive, with hundreds of thousands lacking clean water and sanitation. Well, Dr. Basem Naim is a senior Hamas official and joins us on the line now. Good morning.
Good morning.
What is the cause of the current delay in agreeing a ceasefire deal?
Unfortunately, we have already signed a ceasefire deal on January 17th. This deal is composed of 3 phases. Phase 1, 42 days, which ended on March 1st. And then we have to be engaged in the negotiations of the second phase at the day 16 of the first phase. Unfortunately, the Israelis, they have refused until now to go for the negotiations of the second phase. And they have unfortunately sabotaged the deal, which has been signed again in January under the auspices of the 3 mediators, the Qataris, the Egyptians, and the United States. And they are now seeking for the negotiations of a new deal under totally different conditions. And I think we have said it many times, we are committed to the deal we have signed. We have already fulfilled our obligations. The mediators and the international community is obliged now to oblige Israel to go for implementing the deal.
Yeah,
Israel is
I don't want to talk about what happened in the past. I want to talk about what's going to happen in the future. That agreement has clearly broken down. A new one needs to be brokered. So I ask you again, what is Hamas willing to agree to secure a ceasefire?
Well, it is not. We are not talking about the past. We are talking about a deal has been signed. Why it is broken as if you are taking as granted for the Israelis to sabotage the deal. We have signed the deal. We are committed to this deal, and we are ready to fulfill our obligations. Now it is the turn of Israel to implement the deal. Despite of this, we have cooperatively and positively. We were contacted by the Americans to try to bridge this gap created by the Israelis, and we have said, okay, we can go for the release of one American captured Israeli soldier who has an American nationality, plus the bodies of other 4 soldiers. But at the same time, we want to be sure that we will be engaged in the negotiations of the second phase, which guarantee the total withdrawal of the Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, and Israel has said that is not acceptable. How many of the hostages are still alive?
I have no clear idea about how many of the captured Israeli soldiers are still alive.
How can you have no idea? How can you have no idea?
Because this is I am living outside now. Temporarily, I am living outside the country, and these informations are taken from the people who are in the field, because these captured Israelis are in different areas under very strict security conditions with different groups. But I have to remember everyone that it is always asked about how many Israeli soldiers are still alive, but no one is asking about how many thousands of Palestinians, including men and women and children and minors,
I'm
are
asking
in
you.
Israeli
I'm asking
custody.
you how many are alive because Hamas is in control of the number of hostages and should know how many of those 59 people.
I am
How
talking
many of
about
those 59
personally.
people are still alive?
I
Why
personally,
will Hamas not release all the hostages now, which would be the easiest way to stop this?
yes, we have said it. We are ready to release all the captured Israeli soldiers. In return, our thousands Palestinian prisoners, including men and women and children who are living in a very dire conditions, to be released and to announce the end of this war, the total withdrawal of the Israeli forces, and to open
Yeah,
the
and the US has
gate.
said, that those demands are clearly impractical, and they are not something that the Israelis or the US is willing to agree to in terms of a ceasefire deal.
What
I want
does
to
it mean?
ask
What
you
does it
about. I
mean?
want to ask you
Sorry, no, no.
specifically. No, I want to ask you specifically about the treatment of hostages. Hamas has been accused of using hostages as bargaining chips, of treating them very badly. Some of the returned hostages say they were abused, they were starved, they were threatened by armed men. What is the justification for treating people like this?
I think there's no justification for capturing any innocent civilian by any party. But I think we have Palestinians. We have offered the hand for peace and settlement of this conflict for 30 years. What happened during these 30 years? Thousands of Palestinians, women and children and men were captured, kidnapped from their homes by the Israelis, and we have no choice to get our kidnapped Palestinian civilians back.
And that's not what
This is the
October the
only way.
7th was. October the
But
7th was a terror attack on innocent people, many of whom were killed, were abused, were tortured, and were then taken hostage. That is not what that was.
you
Many
consider
people
it as
many people were disgusted at the scenes of the last hostage release. The caskets of those who had
you
died were displayed on a stage. Behind them was a banner with an anti-Semitic image of Israel's prime minister. There were many other sort of elements to that release that were staged. There were people taking photos. There were people cheering. Why did Hamas do that?
again, you consider it as a terrorist attack. For us, it is a resistance fighting back for 75 years of racist colonial occupation. Thousands and thousands of our people were forcefully displaced. For thousands and thousands were kidnapped. We have denied the basics. Now, Israel is committing a war crime by closing the doors so that Palestinians can get their basic needs, which is the fundamental right.
And I'm asking you a question about what Hamas chose to do with the last hostage release. You claim to want to end this. You claim to want a ceasefire, and yet Hamas paraded caskets of people who had been taken hostage, children who had been taken hostage, in front of photographs of those murdered hostages. There were, words and pictures there that were anti-Semitic. And I ask you again, why did Hamas do that?
Again, I told you again. It is not about a terrorist attack, as you said. It is people who are fighting for their freedom and dignity, who are looking for their independence.
Do you think that gave those killed children dignity? Do you think that's what that was?
Which children? Palestinian children, you mean, or Palestinian women, or which children?
The children who were in those caskets at the last hostage release, when Hamas decided to parade them and take photos of them with banners and anti-Semitic images, do you think that was giving them dignity?
I think if you read all the reports of the UN and independent bodies, you can clearly see where innocent people are dealt with in an inhuman and racist way. I think you have seen spontaneous photos and pictures of released, captured Israeli soldiers who are shaking hands with their...
I'm not talking about Israeli soldiers. I'm not talking about Israeli soldiers. I'm talking about the innocent people who were killed, and I'm talking about the innocent people who were held hostage. I'm not talking about soldiers. And I'm interested, actually, because you can't defend it. You're not even trying to defend it.
Okay, again, I said it. No one, there's no right or no rationale to capture any innocent civilians from both parties. But again, we have offered a hand for peace and settlement of this conflict for 30 years. What is the response? more killing of our people, more annexation of our land, more humiliation of our holy places, and we have no choice than to fight back. Therefore, October 7th is a response to 76 years of racist colonial oppression.
October
And
7th was
therefore,
a terror attack that targeted innocent women,
this is
children,
your
and many
description.
other
This is
people.
your-
I want to ask you
this is your
finally,
description.
because we are running out of time. What is your response to President Donald Trump, the new American president? He's been very vocal about Gaza. He says he wants to seize it, he wants to remove people from it, and he wants to redevelop it. What is your response to Donald Trump?
I hope I can hear your response if someone say I am going to seize London and to expel forcefully the people of London or Manchester of any city out of the for any purpose. I think we are living in our homeland. We are living in our cities. This is our land. It is our fundamental right to have our independent state, self-sovereign state, to have all the right of returning back to our homes and cities where we were forcefully displaced from since 1948. I think this is rejected, this is condemned, this is inhuman, this is against international law, and this is simply a war crime against humanity. This is an ethnic cleansing.
Dr. Basem Naim, senior Hamas official, thank you for joining us on the programme today.
Okay, what's so interesting about that is he said a couple of times there's no justification for capturing and killing innocent people, which of course is what Hamas did on October the 7th. His point is that Israel have also done it to them. But that persistent, stubborn reflection that there's no justification for it, but we did it, but we can't really explain it beyond that, it probably points to just how far away from some degree of rapprochement we could possibly be, because they regard Israelis as killers, the Israelis regard them as killers. Donald Trump is not clearly the answer, for, according to him at least, to bring them together. It feels a long way apart, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I think we've got Manveen Rana on the line now, who is, a real expert in this area. Manveen, what is your reflection on that interview?
It was fascinating hearing him, as you said, not really being able to defend Hamas's actions at all, and not being able to defend the last hostage release when the bodies of those children were brought forward. When you do watch those, and they are, horrific. It is horrific to watch Hamas bringing out the bodies. They do it in a particular way, which basically, as we know, Israel's stated aims at the start of the war were to destroy Hamas. And they come out in full force, in uniforms, making it quite clear that they are not destroyed. That whatever else has happened, that particular war aim has not succeeded. And it's a horrific sight for people who are related to the hostages. Watching that exchange is incredibly difficult. I think Hamas is in a difficult position at the moment. As you said, Donald Trump is a real aggravating factor in all of this. They had signed up to this deal, which was supposed to have moved into stage 2 by now. The difficulty is, if you think at the end of it, when you've handed over all the hostages, you might just lose all of your land to Donald Trump's new vision of a Middle East Riviera. It's very hard to know why you should be giving people up. And I think that's the backdrop which makes all of this really difficult. In addition to that, we know that Israel has recently sort of cut off electricity, and there are attacks on Gaza again. So stage 1 is not ending well, which is what's made it really difficult to go into stage 2. And we've heard lawyers in this country sort of saying that is effectively a war crime, because by cutting off electricity plants, it means that salination plants aren't working, so there is no fresh water for people to drink in Gaza. There are a number of difficulties with that. And for anybody who really cares about the hostages, we know that there are at least more than 20 hostages who are still alive. There are more than 30 bodies still to be returned. Any delay in moving on to stage 2 just makes that less and less likely.
And he kept eliding the distinction between Israeli military and Israeli hostages. He, in sort of self-justificatory fashion, Hamas's position is, we've taken Israeli soldiers. Well, they have taken some Israeli soldiers, but they've also taken some Israeli citizens as well, and women and children, of course.
Yeah, and I think that's what, quite clearly the Hamas representative you had on found it very difficult to justify that. I think it's impossible for people to justify. And on both sides, we have seen a number of the Palestinians who've been released by Israel as part of stage one have also been women and children who haven't had due process. So, there have been terrible crimes on both sides which haven't targeted the military. They have targeted innocent civilians. And the longer this war goes on, the more it's the civilians on both sides who will pay.
And before you go, Manveen, we're really looking forward to you coming on Times at 1 o'clock. You're so good at what you do, but you are an experienced journalist. Some people are saying, why do you have Hamas on the radio? They're terrorists. Why do you do it?
I'm so glad you did, because I've worked in enough countries where the media will only ever present its government's view on things. We can't not hear from other sides just because the government has a particular view on something. In order to understand any conflict, whether you agree with it or not, you've got to be able to hear both sides in order to understand how that war ends. If we only ever listen to what Donald Trump tells us about the negotiations, we won't understand why they're not leading to a result. You've got to be able to hear from all sides to decide for yourself. There is a terrible row, I think, with sort of people now about not platforming opinions you don't want to hear. I just think that seems like madness. Knowledge is so important. You've got to be able to hear these things to decide what you really think. So I'm really glad you put them on. I think it's great for people to be able to hear, an interview where they're being held to account and to decide for themselves.
And knowledge is a great thing, and you'll be adding to some of our knowledge at 1 o'clock today, man. We can't wait for that programme. Look forward to hearing it. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks.
That's Manveen Rana there, who's presenting the Times at 1 all of this week.